Please pray with me. May these words that I speak be grounded in my soul, encouraged by the God presence in me, and may these words you hear be captured by your soul and enlivened by the God presence in you. Amen. Well, we're going to get to that scripture lesson in a little while, but I'm going to start off with another place. When I was thinking what I wanted to talk about today, the phrase that kept on coming to my mind was east of Eden. And so let me start by saying that when Lorraine and I went to Japan as missionaries, we spent our first 2 years in Tokyo at a Japanese language school. Though Tokyo was then the largest city in the world, there was no English language television. And the only English language radio station was the American Armed Forces Radio, which was there because of the American bases which were all around the city. In other parts of Japan, some of the American bases were so large that they also had American Forces television there, but we didn't get that in Tokyo, just the radio station. But that was okay with us. We were quite happy with it. It was a nostalgia trip for us, a return to the days before television, because a lot of the programs they carried were programs that we used to hear on the radio before television came along. I remember, for instance, that on Sundays, if we were away from home at some sort of an activity, we always tried to get home by early Sunday evening so that we could be home in time to hear Lux Radio Theater on the American Forces Radio. Now, it wasn't new versions of Lux Radio Theater. It was all reruns of the old stuff we used to hear when we were kids, but it was the only English kind of radio that we heard, and we really enjoyed being there to listen to those stories, even a second time around. I remember that one of my favorite programs on that American Forces Radio network ran on Saturday mornings. It was called East of Eden, and it was hosted by a rabbi who played soft jazz and told stories and shares thoughts kind of in the Garrison Keillor or Stuart McLean kind of way of sharing. Living in a strange country, in an unfamiliar culture, it always kind of felt homey to me. I often wondered if that was what the host was going for, whether this fellow was trying to make it homey for the American Forces personnel who were living far from home and felt a little more like they were at home when they heard these stories and this kind of familiar music. That seemed strange to me when I think about it, that he would have called it East of Eden, because in its origin, I don't think the phrase East of Eden was supposed to feel homey. The term first appears in the 3rd chapter of Genesis, when God becomes angry with Adam and Eve for eating of the forbidden fruit. And God drives them out of the Garden of Eden to the east. It mustn't have been very far to the east, because the story says that God placed cherubim and also a flaming sword at the entrance to the garden so that the humans couldn't get back in. All symbolism, of course. As Jim says, there was no Garden of Innocence at the beginning. There is nothing to return to. But that doesn't mean that we don't try, at least in our minds, and at least in our nostalgia. Again, Donald Trump is the whipping boy. Donald Trump's campaign for president ran on the slogan, "Make America Great Again." That seems to presume that there was a time in the past when America was great, and this is an attempt to return to it. What time was that? And for whom was it great? My hunch is that for American blacks and for Aboriginal people in the States, the past wasn't as great as the present is, even if the present isn't all that great. I see an ad on CBC television for a program which is running this summer, in which Canadian families go back through the decades and live their days as they would have in each of the decades. I haven't seen the show, maybe some of you have, but in the ad there's always a voice that plays back in my mind. It's the voice of a young woman who says, how did women cope back then, when they didn't have all the conveniences that women have now? And we may remember some of all of that past time with nostalgia, but the past wasn't always great for women. The same thoughts run through our personal lives as well. In groups that I'm part of, a question which is often asked, and I suppose it's often asked in these groups because we're all old, or older anyway, the question is always asked, if you could go back to relive a time in your past, what time would you return to? Have you been in groups where we have those kind of discussions? I don't know, what time would you choose if you had to go back to live a time in the past? A time that you would like to relive again? Well, I can think of many times in the past that I remember with great fond memories and good feelings. But when I think about those past times, I can also remember the hurt and the struggle that I had there. I mean, the past was filled with good things and with difficult things, just as the present is filled with good things and with difficult things. And I have to say that I always decide that the present is the time I want to be in, living the life I'm living now. There's been more than one television series built on the premise that the lead character in the story goes back in time to some time when they made a big mistake. They let the girl of their dreams go, or they chose a path which took them away from where they really wanted to end up. And they go back in this television series and they relive that moment. And this time they do it right and live happily ever after. It's kind of a neat process to think about, except that whenever I think about that, I always think, well, what's to say that they didn't find another time somewhere down the lane when they screwed up again and went off in the wrong direction? I mean, life is what it is. We're told about the story of the man who's told to make a choice, and he has two doors to go through, and in one door there's a tiger, and in another door there's a beautiful girl, but he doesn't know which is which, and he has to make the choice and the decision. And people have said, people wiser than me have said, that's not really how it goes. Really how it goes is you pick a door and you open it and you walk through it, and you have two more doors and two more choices to make, and that's how life unfolds. And sometimes you go way off, and then you pick other paths and end up back where you were supposed to be. I said earlier that I wondered if the host of East of Eden was trying to make his program homey. He was, after all, a rabbi. I wonder if he wasn't trying to say something like this, that this is home, where you are. It's the only one you have. There is no garden of innocence to return to. There is no promised land that's just waiting out there to be discovered. So make the most of this home, which you have given. It's all you have. And you may find out that it's a great place to be, after all. I believe that's what Jacob discovered in this morning's scripture that Jim shared with us. He had to flee from Esau's wrath. You may remember from the story, if you heard it again, wasn't included in the synopsis, but Jacob had to flee because he really wasn't a nice guy to his brother. And his brother was mad at him because he'd used all this subterfuge to sort of get what really belonged to his brother. And he got it with Rebekah's help. He stole Isaac's blessing. He stole Esau's birthright, which belonged to him. Esau had reason to be angry because Jacob had betrayed him. After Jacob fled from Esau, his life wasn't without his struggles, but by and large, he prospered. And life was good to him. He lived in no Garden of Eden, but he ended up having 2 wives, many children, land and flocks, wealth beyond his imagining. The biggest struggle in it all was that he continued to be alienated from his family because of Esau's wrath. The story goes on to say that the time had finally come for Jacob to confront his betrayal of Esau and to try and make peace with his brother and to restore his relationship with the family. It says that as he returned home, he wrestled with his fears and with the angel of God who was leading him. Jacob learned that doing the right thing when you have benefited from subterfuge is never easy. The story says that ever after, he walked with a limp because he had been wounded in his struggles. His own struggles because of the kind of choices he made. Don't be surprised if there are scars left from the struggles of life, even the struggles that you brought on yourself. That's the downside of living. That's the downside of living this life that you've been given. But Jacob was about to discover the upside. For the story says that when the light of day had finally broken and Jacob could see Esau in the distance, Esau ran to him weeping, and the brothers wept and kissed each other. The struggle to come back had been worth it, and Jacob was back as a member of the family. He was home. Jacob expressed his joy at their reunion, saying, "Seeing your face is like seeing the face of God, for you have welcomed me back with love." And when I read that line, I was interested in the fact that in the Garden of Innocence and Perfection, when Adam had done what was wrong, he hid himself from God. He wouldn't look into the face of God. But here, outside of the garden, in an imperfect and struggling land, a land that was nevertheless home to him, when Jacob recognized what he had done wrong, he struggled with it, he made amends, and he saw the face of God. I suspect there are times when each of us yearn to be in Eden, where there is no struggle, where there is no conflict, where everything is just perfect. I suspect that we would like to live in a garden of innocence where we would be free from our own insecurities, from the character defects that we're aware of in ourselves. We long for the perfect time and place that only exists in our imaginations. But the lesson which may be present in this story is that when we struggle with who we are, in the real world that we live in, we may find ourselves embraced by others in love, because it's the world that they live in too. And they understand our imperfections and our failures because they've experienced it too. There is no other world for any of us. But we may find that in this imperfect world, and as imperfect as we are, that time to time we can find the face of God. Let us have a few moments with that thought.